Welcome everyone to the Environmental Community Practice. I'm Heather Riggs, Director of Administration here at NEMA, she, her. I just want to welcome you today and give our virtual land acknowledgement. Virtual spaces cannot replace the lands that sustain and empower us. I'm in Arlington, Massachusetts, homeland of the Massachusetts and Pawtucket people and their allied tribes, past and present. NEMA recognizes that our organization and those of our members were founded within a colonizing society which continues the exclusion and erasures of many Indigenous peoples throughout New England and beyond. So I just want to welcome everybody as we are talking about climate change today. I hope everybody, as I mentioned, is in a cool spot today because it is a little bit warm here in New England. I will be turning it over to our co-chairs of this community of practice, to Paul and Matt.
Thanks for joining us. Oh,
just say hello.
Great. Thanks for joining us. Just a couple of housekeeping notes before we kick it over to our guest speakers today. I am going to drop a link in the chat for a Excel sheet if you would like to stay in the loop on these meetings. If you're not already signed up for that, you can put in your name and contact info. And then just quickly, we'll shout out that our next meeting will be October the 5th at the same time, 3 p.m. Eastern. And I believe, Matt, am I right, that you're going to talk a little bit about environmental literacy?
Yeah, I'll say a few words about that at the conclusion of today's.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
Okie doke, you'll see that in the chat momentarily. And I am just going to pass the mic over to Sarah Sutton from Environment and Culture Partners. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Paul. Well, hello, everyone. So many of you know that I spent so many years in New England. It was a growing up place for me in the museum sector, and it's just too much fun to be able to pop back in this way and to have so many of you participate in Environment and Culture Partners projects over the last couple of years. You might see references to the projects you've been part of. But if I go back to the beginning and get started on our presentation today, so I'm joined by Stephanie Shapiro. She'll be introducing herself and chiming in later on, but she is my excellent friend, excellent partner, excellent thinker on climate work, and she and I co-founded Environment and Culture Partners. So many of you might have known me as Sustainable Museums and sort of my mom likes to think of me as like a lone ranger, but you know, you can't get any climate work done as a lone ranger, can you? It has to be a group like this, right? So when Stephanie suggested that we figure out how to work together to create more leverage, a nonprofit doing climate work in collaboration with others is what came out of it. And so what we'd like to do today, and I guess we can start with the show, Stephanie, or is it already up? I'm just looking at my regular screen. Okay, breathing while she switches screens. That's what I get for having two screens. There we go. I see you now. All right. So we're going to tell you a little bit about Environment and Culture Partners and our purpose and our mission, and a quick run through of the projects that we've been working on. That is a springboard to things that we'd like to do next. And we'd love to think with you at the end about the ways in which the work ECP has done or would like to do, or the things you're thinking about and would like to do, might all come together in good work for somebody to advance climate action. So we're going to talk about projects, and then we're going to talk about that long list of what we'd like to do next. So a little bit about ECP and conversation about the structure. So I told you that we're formed as a nonprofit. Our job is to strengthen and broaden all of your work demonstrating environmental leadership for the cultural sector. So we do that inside the sector. We do that between cultural sector and other sectors adjacent to us. And we do it in the communities where the institutions exist, trying to find whatever sort of leverage there is that helps us create greater impact and a better world. So we've got a few things to show you, and we'll start with the next one, Stitch. Oh, sorry. skipped a page here. So a little bit of history on the cultural sector and its progress in climate work. So a bunch of you on the screen I know have been around since 2004 and 8, and that when there was such a building boom, remembering when everybody was building new museums. And that was the way that we got to do a lot of good climate work, because we could build it into the structure of the expansion or the new building. Because leadership in energy and environmental design, gave people a checklist and a guidebook to how to do this work. And funders and board members and strategic planners and architects brought this to the museum field. And so we started with a museum idea and we ended up with a green museum in many locations. And then the crash came. It happened to be just when Elizabeth and Wiley and I had published the Green Museum, and we were thinking, this is it, there's going to be a revolution. Then we had a financial crash and all the buildings stopped. But then people, when they sort of recovered from that shock, they realized that programming and energy efficiency were the things that they could do when they weren't building museums that helped them save money in a financial crisis, but still do their climate work. So that's really what the kind of activity was like in the sector between 09 and 16. And then we start to have some big change really when President Trump took the United States out of the Paris Agreement, because all the folks, even like me, even like Stephanie, even many of you who were letting higher ups, leadership, government drive the green pathway, realized that we couldn't count on that anymore. It was time for us to do the work. And so there's been this big groundswell of folks, whether it's formally through We Are Still In, and now America is All In, as a cross-sectoral engagement on climate action, or specific project in museums, or creating something like the Environment and Climate Network that was part of AAM. It was previously called Pick Green. We started to come together to move it from just individual action to something more of us would do together. And now we find ourselves in sort of a supercharged time, or at least that's what Gina McCarthy, the National Climate Advisor, likes to say, turbocharged situation where we have urgency and we have funding. And so more work is happening. And we find that happening through really solid research, setting goals, creating good partnerships, and taking action. So now let's talk about some of the stuff that's going on. So Stitch is something you might have heard of, where folks are using this online tool through AIC, FAIC, to calculate the carbon impacts of materials they choose for storing collections or exhibiting them. The good news is that all of this groundwork is now getting a second boost with this sort of acceleration, this turbocharging. And the Stitch project now has an NEH grant in order to expand the carbon calculator. So if you've ever used this and you've plugged in a number and you've found no data available, those blanks are going to be filled with the next NEH grant to fund that work. So it has a second life and it's going to expand substantially. Culture over carbon, you all hopefully know a lot about that one. This is the 2-year IMLS grant, snagged through the good work of New England Museum Association as a really strong partnership with New Buildings Institute and with ECP. And so we looked at 139 institutions worth of 230 or maybe 40 buildings and looked at what their energy profiles were. Many of you participated and probably just received in the email from Danielle, another member of our team, the report on culture over carbon, the full report on what we learned in that process, what the recommendations are for folks who have museums who are trying to save energy, and also what the policy implications are of changes in the energy sector and how they will affect museums. So I know that Stephanie's got some links to share with you about all of that, but you can certainly find it on the ECPRS, the ECP website. Sorry, let me silence the telephone. Now, Culture Over Carbon spawned the Carbon Inventory Project because a lot of folks were struggling to manage Energy Star Portfolio Manager. And we found that if we provided a little extra support, we could get a lot of people to participate. And the idea was that we would get more participants so that we could establish a good enough estimate a representative sample to give us an estimate of what the cultural sector's energy carbon footprint is. And we came up with it. It's 4 million metric tons of CO2 emitted just by running our places, not doing all the exhibits, not bringing people to it, just by turning the lights on and keeping temperature and relative humidity. So we've got good data, and now it's time to start acting on it. And this is where I'll hand it over to Stephanie, and it's where I could say, but wait, there's more, because there's so much going on. So I'll let Stephanie take it away with this.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm Stephanie. Thanks so much for having us. I'm our managing director here at ECP. And as Sarah said, excellent partnership within our team. We also have another team member, Danielle, and we've been so excited to be able to work with a lot of your organizations and other institutions across the US. So just to continue where Sarah started, this is the Climate Resilience Resources for Cultural Heritage project of Held in Trust. And so this is an NEH funded project with FAIC, and we're working to basically create some tools for cultural heritage stewards to increase their awareness of climate risk and events, really develop the knowledge and skills that they need to build climate resilience, and do so in a collaborative effort. So this project, which the resources will begin to be available in November, is going to have an interactive map that provides site level climate risk information and data, comprehensive learning modules from everything with a vulnerability survey to just an introduction to what climate resilience is. And we have 2 learning communities, one in New Mexico and one in Puerto Rico. And they're not only piloting these resources, but they're developing their resilience strategies together. So we're really excited to have these begin to be released in November. They'll be continually built on through the spring of 2024, and we'll definitely be making sure that everyone here knows about them. We also have the Frankenthaler Climate Initiative. So this is a program that we co-administer with the Helen Frankenthaler Foundation and Rocky Mountain Institute, RMI. I know we have a few folks that were registered who are recipients for FCI in the last few years. And this is the largest private national grant-making program addressing climate change in the cultural sector. And we're excited. In August, we announced that our 3rd cycle of grants wrapped up, and we awarded $2.7 million to 48 arts organizations in the US. And overall, over the life cycle of this program of 3 years, we've conferred about $10.8 million, supporting 175 projects at 150 arts organizations. And we have good news. The Helen Frankenthaler board announced that we'll be having 2 more years of this program through 2024 and 2025. So please check the website, frankenthalerclimateinitiative.org. Probably in the next month, we'll have the final eligibility and timeline items up on the website for folks to be able to prepare to submit those applications in probably early 2024. We also have Caretakers of Wonder, Discovery Museum, who's on the line here, is part of. So this is another IMLS funding project with the Madison Children's Museum and the Association of Children's Museums, where we're working with 9 children's museums in the US from 4 different ecological regions. So Pacific Northwest, Northeast, Southeast, and about the Midwest. And we're creating a developmental framework. So this framework is to build a framework for children 0 to 8 so that they can build agency, climate knowledge, compassion for the natural world, and hope for a bright climate future. So this will be a website with tools and resources and guides for caregivers and museum professionals alike to really work with those children 0 to 8. We have a multidisciplinary team of experts in early childhood, climate psychology, culture and climate, all working on this. And we're just about to begin the 2nd year of that work. And with so much going on, as we've just listed, and so much to be done, and with the field being so large, it's really critical, as Sarah said, that we really pool our information, our expertise, and our resources and work together. We can't have any lone rangers here doing this work. And since early summer, ECP has been working to engage cultural associations in a collaborative effort to advance the cultural sector's climate mitigation, adaptation, and resilience work. And so we've been meeting with and began then with national associations, regional and special focus area associations to not only sign a public agreement that states that work in the climate work in the cultural sector is important, and that they agree also to participate in and share cooperative projects and opportunities with membership. And so these are our current signees, which include NEMA. Big thank you to NEMA for signing on and your continued support of sector-wide climate efforts. We're excited to continue to announce additional signees as we receive them and hope to continue to expand the associations here. So I just want to go over now kind of what we want to work on next, like where are we going in the future and what's top of mind in the sector that we've seen as either gaps that need to be filled, information that folks need, and resources that we can direct to everyone. And really, this is that idea of these cooperative projects. And again, climate struggles are large and complicated. They're sometimes overwhelming, sometimes uncomfortable topic, and we need to work together to make a lasting impact and do this work together. So first, we really want to increase our access to federal funding and frankly, just all funding that exists. Right now, there's funding opportunities from the Inflation Reduction Act, the bipartisan infrastructure legislation, and that's listed below the Federal Climate Funding Hub, which is managed by our partners at America's All In. If you go there, they have kind of all of the opportunities within these legislations broken down by sector. So you can see if your organization or your community or your county are eligible for any of these, for any of this funding. So we definitely urge you to look at that. We know there's been a couple webinars as well for the cultural sector on this. And we have a recording on our website from one, but the most up-to-date information is really at that Federal Climate Funding Hub. We also want to share an opportunity out of the Department of Energy, Renew America's Nonprofits, which ECP submitted an application to as a prime recipient with the Aquarium Conservation Partnership and Veritas Group. And so this is really to be able to fund shovel-ready energy efficiency projects for cultural institutions up to $200,000 each. So we are very hopeful. Please cross your fingers that we receive this award to really be able to direct funding to cultural institutions in the United States to be able to implement those energy efficiency projects. So we'll find out in October, and if we are awarded this grant, we will make sure that you know about it, and you can begin to prepare your application, which will begin to be open in about January, February. The next two projects really build on that culture over carbon research that Sarah mentioned and that New England Museum Association is part of. So one of the discoveries, as Sarah said, which was impetus for the carbon inventory project, was using Energy Star Portfolio Manager. And this idea that state and federal policies and regulations are increasingly requiring energy use reporting. So this currently is typically being fulfilled by using Energy Star ratings, which some of you are familiar about if you've purchased a fridge or benchmarked your organization's energy. And so it's an easy way to share a comparative score that is trusted and verifiable. It's also free to use. So for example, cities in New York and Boston and Washington State even are requiring reporting of energy usage for buildings, sometimes 25,000 square feet, even 50,000 square feet. And we anticipate the frequency of this in cities and counties and states just continuing to increase as time goes on. But the problem is if you do run your report, as you can see on the slide, you receive an NA because we don't have a museum benchmark. So we're working with New Buildings and Institute and EPA to establish the museum category. So what we need is a representative sample of museums, and we're hoping that all of you will take advantage of this opportunity to help by completing the survey when it's available. So we'll promise to share those links and the links to other items that we talk about here. We'll be probably launching that later this year or early next year in 2024. We also have min-max. So this is in reference to the relative humidity and temperature ratings that, or I'm sorry, not ratings, parameters that museums are using for their collections care. And so out of Culture Over Carbon, we found that art museums have a high thermal baseline due to their use of fossil fuels, and they have a very high use of energy per square foot. And we think that's likely due to that amount of energy needed for collections care management. So we're right now working with New Buildings Institute to really pursue next steps for funding what we're hoping is a research project to determine if actually expanding the temperature and relative humidity parameters actually yields energy savings. We think so, but we want to be able to have the data to really back that up and be able to have organizations who are thinking about expanding their parameters, even if it's for specific types of collections, have that data to be able to use, and we can more confidently move forward with organizations being able to widen those parameters. And then we are also really interested in climate psychology and climate communications. And so we're currently thinking about different opportunities around kind of ranging from providing training and resources to museum personnel for how to think about incorporating climate into their existing exhibitions, programming, and education, in addition to seeing if we could secure training or provide training to museum staff to talk about climate, or how to kind of make the leap from talking about existing work and what climate means, even if that's to media or to other outlets. We're also interested in that link between climate anxiety and psychology and the impact on museum personnel as well as visitors, and even considering kind of providing even points of care in museums for folks as it's needed. So I'm going to hand it back to Sarah, who does have a few more additional items to share, and then she'll be able to move us into the discussion.
Thanks, Stephanie. I know this sounds like a lot, but it's all fun, and we're glad that you're here to learn about it. Going from climate psychology and climate communication, we're thinking about what does it look like for the public to take action. We know that we ask in a lot of our museum exhibits and in our programs, we ask or encourage or enable folks to do things at home. How does this work that you see at the museum translate to what you do at home? And we believe that people do things at home, but we don't know exactly what or how much, and we don't really understand the mechanism to leverage that action or how to leverage that action on a larger scale into the community or into other levels. And we're curious about that. We haven't yet figured out the path forward, but we know that we're going to find one. We suspect, especially from feedback from two of the projects and Caretakers of Wonder, that our audiences are more ready for this than museum staff have realized. We as museum staff tend to think that the public is still back 5 or more years ago in the cautious and concerned and not really alarmed and ready to take action. But that seems to be shifting. And the reason we feel that way is two folks in Caretakers Over Wonder project were designing exhibits, and they took what's called the SASSY assessment. So that's the Yale Climate Communications, very quick self-assessment of public engagement and concerns about climate. And these two institutions did the SASSY test as if they were the public. They were answering as if they were the public. So they had their assumptions. And then they asked the public to take the SASSY test. And they found that the museums were way more cautious about the public's appetite to engage on climate than the public was. 2 points of information is still only 2 points of information, but they were so surprising for both groups of staff that we think there's a message there that we need to look into this further. So how can we figure out how to create more paths to substantive action? And then how can we measure what's successful in getting people to take action and what that action actually is? So we don't know how to take that yet, how to do that project yet, but it's something we're thinking about. And another one, I'm going to give a shout out to Rainey here as I whip out a copy of the book and see if you can just see. It worked earlier. Where the Mount Desert Island Historical Society material is showing up in a research project on how the arts and humanities can document climate change. We'd very much like to figure out how to co-create a project where museums mine their collections in order to identify art and historical material that is proxy for climate change. So you're looking at an example of proxy on the right. We can't actually measure climate change in a document, but we can measure climate change by comparing two documents or two photographs or pieces of information along a timeline to show change over time. You know how many times you've done a history exhibit where you've talked about change over time, right? We can apply that to climate. And we think there's a way to do that through the National Endowment for the Humanities Community and COVID grant, which actually has a climate category. And it engages folks on looking at their collections and having community conversations about climate change. So we're hoping that that's a cooperative project we could design. And this just gives you a little example about how you can take these pieces and turn them into a message about climate or environment. So I want to be very clear here. You can talk about environmental change that is not the same as climate change, and you can talk about climate change. So on the top, this slice of information about weather conditions. If you compare weather conditions over time in certain latitudes in the ocean, you can demonstrate how temperature and conditions have shifted latitudes over time because of climate change. But the image on the bottom is great for talking about environmental impacts and how policy can change impacts. This is a collection at Chicago's Field Museum, where the images of the birds on the left are taken in a time period when there isn't any regulation on coal-fired power plants. And these are white birds collecting soot on their feathers. The images, that right-hand side of that image is birds who were captured, and the coat measurement, color measurements were taken in the same period of molting, but in the time period that we had regulations for scrubbing coal-fired power plants. And it's a demonstration in a very visual way that policy to keep the air clean had a physical result. And our collections tell all these stories. All kinds of collections can tell these stories if you know how to look for them. And we'd really like to do an NEH research project on what that looks like so that we could pilot it for other museums to think about how they could look at their collections. Because 3 years from now, we want all museums to be using their collections to talk about climate change in their communities or in the region their collections came from. And we got one other idea to talk to you about. A ports project we're going to pilot here in Tacoma. This is just a random real estate shot of part of the Port of Tacoma. And if you look, if I can get my cursor here, this is the Washington State Historical Society. This is the Tacoma Museum of Glass. This is the Tacoma Art Museum. Just around the corner is the Maritime History Museum, and off screen up here is a historic fort and a zoo. All of them front on the port. And all of that is important is a way in which we can engage the public in thinking about ports. Now, why the heck do we care about ports? Ports have an awful lot of money, but also they are a seriously intense place for fossil fuels and a very powerful shift in fossil fuel in the maritime industry. If the port is a green marine affiliated port. The city of Tacoma's port is, city of Seattle, city of Boston, Philadelphia, all of those ports, and there are, I don't know if there are hundreds, but there are many in the United States and Canada, are all focused on doing green climate work, whether it's changing portside hookups to being electric, so that a ship of any kind, when it ties up, it shifts to electric energy, not diesel powered, oil powered in some way. Or doing community engagement on creating a healthier port, a healthier water system, and healthier landscapes. And in order for them to do that work, they need to be certified in community engagement on sustainability and climate topics. And what better way for them to do that work than in partnership and through the cultural institutions that are part of their port life. And when we started the conversations here in Tacoma about this possibility, both the Green Marine folks, the port folks, and all of those museums just described, all were interested in having these conversations because they recognize that that intersection is just like any other urban setting, only this is an urban setting where the water part is planned, and we're really working on managing it. So the next project is to figure out how we can design a way of interacting where the relationship between all the cultural institutions and the port management cooperate and align to make a greener, healthier space for everybody. Well, that seems to be the long list of the things that we're up to or we've seen going on lately. So we want to shift the discussion to all of us, to the things that you're experiencing, to the things that you're interested in. And Stephanie and I often use this slide because it really reflects what our daily life is like. We go through all the phases of these categories. Most of the time, well, all the time it's we love what we do, but sometimes laid over it is, are we doing enough? Oh no, this is terrible. We're not accomplishing enough. But always we feel like this is really good and important work, and we're glad to be doing it. I suspect you often feel the same way, even if the colors change a little bit to the amount of the pie chart they fill up. And we'd be interested in hearing what your thoughts are about doing your own climate work and in the couple of questions that we have to share with you. So Stephanie's going to flash these questions now, and then we're going to drop the screen, but don't panic, because we'll put those first two questions into the chat for us to use for discussion. And then when we feel like we've processed through that enough, we'll add that third question to the chat too, and see what we can hear from you guys. So if we're ready, we can begin that. Feel free to raise your hands to comment or ask a question.
Great. So we're happy to answer any questions. And then here is our first question. I'm just putting in the chat. Sorry, the formatting got kind of weird. There you go. We'll start with the want for your institution. So what do you need most to support your efforts? And what is the one thing or fix that would make all of the difference?
And we know you're all at different points in this work, or you might be at different points. And that doesn't matter. We're interested in hearing all of those, whatever situation you're in.
I mean, I think our greatest need right now is, we've been starting to move along in this direction, but we've never had a staff person that was dedicated to this effort. And so it's kind of this thing that gets done when, there's 5 minutes at the end of the day. And we realize it's just not feasible. And so it's great that there's funding for initiatives, but is there funding to actually have a staff person who dedicates their 100% of their time to moving these projects forward?
Well, the short answer is no, we haven't found that yet, except it is the basic definition of capacity building. And so wherever you've got a funder who's putting that on their capacity building, this is their best way to build your capacity.
Can I chime in quickly, Sarah? So at our last guest speaker meeting, we had our, I work at Discovery Museum in Acton, Massachusetts. We had our CEO come and talk. And the thing that I love about how we approach this is that we all are a part of it, or not literally every person that works at the museum, but the vast majority of the full-time regular staff sit in a sustainability meeting, and we talk about our plan, and we talk about our to-dos, and we go off and we do them, and then we come back and report back. And I think it's a great way to, you know, I feel like if there were one person, it could present challenges for us. It may be different at different institutions, but that model really works well for us.
That's nice to hear.
I also have a thought. Can you hear me? Again, I'm wondering if my buds are working. I wonder, based bullet 2 there, what is the one thing or fix that would make all the difference? I wonder if Sarah and Stephanie, if you ever hear museums resistance because they feel that it's not what they're best equipped to do. So I'm going to, for example, an art museum saying, you know what, we have a natural history museum in town, and they're more equipped to have the climate conversation. Or we have a nature center that their audience is more receptive, so we'll let them do that, and we'll just do what we do best. And that's not what we do best. Am I making that up, or does that exist?
We've definitely heard that, right? It's not part of our mission. This doesn't impact us. This doesn't matter. You know, we're just here to exhibit. I'd say we've heard that absolutely less than we did 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. That was probably the number one thing we heard when we were even first starting to talk about climate with any museums, kind of less the zoos, aquariums, botanical gardens, right? I think now we can hear it, you know, we do hear it, but it's more that people just don't know where to start. Like they're like, we understand the connection. We see there could be something. Yes, it's easier for our, you know, the science or nature center. We're interested, but where do we start? So I think it's less of it's not part of our mission and more of a we don't know where to start piece. And that's where we can say energy efficiency or like pick one thing. Then it's just, you know, they're just shutting the door on it. You know, Sarah, what do you think?
Yep. Spot on. I completely agree.
Thank you.
So we've got Henry. Art has a raised hand.
Yes. Hi, I'm Hank Art. I'm the Sustainability Projects Manager at the Clark Art Institute in Williamstown. And the Clark is just blessed by having a campus that includes 70 acres of woodland and approximately that amount of open space, in addition to the buildings that people think of as the museum. In February of 2022, a strategic plan was adopted by the museum that incorporated the natural landscape of the campus in the mission of the museum, trying to seamlessly bring together art and nature in art, and not to make a distinction between the two, but to try to integrate and fuse that in a common experience. Having found that about a third of the visitors to the Clark campus actually don't go in and consume the gallery experience, but are outside. And particularly during COVID, that really came home as a very strong part of the visitors' experience. So one of my tasks is to try to see how the Clark might develop programs, eventually exhibitions and the like. And the thought of using the collection to interpret environmental change is a very strong one, and one that actually mirrors the interest in reinterpreting the collection or parts of the collection in terms of the social, equitable, colonial environment in which objects were created. So the backstory about how did this silver object come to be, and who was involved in mining the silver, and the rest has already been done for part of the collection. And it certainly is something that could and should be done for the rest of the collection. Many of the images were committed during a period in which the environment was quite different, either during the Little Ice Age or even before that. But having said all that, I've been at the Clark now 9 months, and most of that time has been with the nuts and bolts of the performance of buildings, the energy, water, waste flows, and the other kinds of traditional, although the tradition is relatively recent, traditional sustainability measures. And most of my time has been spent now in trying to help the Clark draft a sustainability plan that will go along with the strategic plan and not implement it, but just outline what needs to be done. And in doing that, I've found that many cultural institutions and museums are doing sustainable things, but one of the things I'd love to capture is actual written texts of sustainability plans that have been there, and that other cultural institutions would be willing to share. And I'm sure that the Clark, not to commit them to something that they wouldn't want to do, but the transparency that's embedded in the strategic plan would indicate that we would be willing to share whatever we come up with. And hopefully by come up with, we're talking about soon after the end of this year, going into 2024, that we would actually have an agreed upon sustainability plan for the institution. So one of the questions I have is, where out there might be a clearinghouse of actual published sustainability plans that are in a form that could be shared with a wider audience?
I was going to say, start with the Discovery Museum, and Paul shared theirs.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd say no, as much as we want to have a clearinghouse for different items, I'd say maybe in this group, the AM document library typically has the Smithsonian has a pretty robust plan, but it covers a lot of ground where you could definitely take some pieces from Sarah.
Yep. I'd say there are not enough there, and not surprisingly, the National Endowment for the Humanities recognizes that and is trying to fund more of these climate action plans. So their Climate Smart Humanities program is designed to fund this. And hopefully that will mean in the next few years, we start to have a collection of documents. They'll be wildly different because every situation is so different. And NEH has a good outline, very basic outline of these are the things that usually go into it. And really that's a good starting point, and the best available we have now, except for the Discovery Museums, which is awesome. And they share broadly, which so many should be doing, and they don't. I mean, that's why we can't find them, right?
Right, well, I'm going to add our second question into the chat. It's our wish for the sector. So what would you change about our sector's approach, attitude, or culture that would make advancing this work easier?
It's a little hard to leap from the practical to the more theoretical, but think in terms of policies or the way we design our expectations for how museums work or what a professional's job is, what training is for profession. What would shift the culture of the sector if we were to shift it? Colleen.
The past few months, I've been really reflecting on something that Marnie Kindness said at an ECOP a few months ago, which was about thinking about the materials the artists are using, and like the carbon impact of, you know, how much plastic is being used. Like, are the exhibits ones that can be like deconstructed and turned into something else? And thinking about that cycle. It's a topic that I haven't heard a lot of, but I'm starting to hear more about. But I think that it's really important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and definitely check out, I'll add the link to Stitch, that tools for informed sustainable choices, and, you know, FAIC, and, you know, it's definitely becoming more top of mind for a lot of the groups, the, you know, conservator groups, and you can always use Stitch, you know, as well. Great. Maureen?
Hi, I'm Maureen Hennessy. I am also at the Clark, where I have the pleasure of working with Hank as a member of the Green Committee. And I know Sarah and some of you from a long time ago. I think what would be really helpful are actually some of the initiatives that you've just been talking about, trying to get launched, things like the Min-Max project. I think one of the things that we're also often facing, especially in art museums, is this notion of, well, we can't have too much fluctuation with temperature and relative humidity, and these are what the rules are, and not just the rules for art collections, but particularly when you have things on loan. And you know, it was interesting because during COVID, there was a shift from there must be a human courier with every art shipment going everywhere in the world to, oh, guess not.
Yeah.
Never mind. You know, so, but barring another kind of COVID-like disaster, I mean, some of these things, you know, it would be really helpful if we could say, well, this is what the research tells us. Or conversely, in terms of the pushback, actually, the research tells us that having a greater fluctuation in temperature doesn't really mitigate our energy use. So I do think some of these things will be real. And I know that it's not the quick fix that a lot of us wish we had, but I think they'll be really helpful. So I'm really grateful when I hear about these kinds of initiatives that you're taking on behalf of the sector. So thank you.
Thank you. We're having a good time doing it. We get to work with all the good people too. Paul?
Can't figure out how to raise my virtual hand. So the one thing, and I heard you and Stephanie talk about how you're seeing this change, but the one thing that I would like to see shift in our sector, and honestly across all of our everywhere in the world, is to not consider one's job not a climate job. Like we're all in this, right? Like it's all of our jobs are climate jobs. And right. And so that can be challenging for folks that don't feel that they have the expertise to have conversations about climate or to know what to do. But I think, you know, to the like, how do I change the building, or how do I change the infrastructure? That's been talked about already this afternoon, but like start somewhere. And for knowing how to communicate with the public about it, there are resources, and some of those resources are right here in the Zoom room. And I know that I will always say, please reach out to me if that's something. I love talking to people about climate change. So my email is it's on the Discovery Museum's website. You can find it there. I'll type it in the chat.
Marnie?
Hey everyone, I'm Marnie Kindness. I'm at the RISD Museum in Providence. Thanks for the shout out, Colleen. I think about that all the time too. Something that I think would be really helpful, and maybe this doesn't impact everyone, is that in the art museum field, so many of us have different professional networks. Like there's AAMD for directors. I'm in a exhibition organizers group. I know the registrars have a group. And I think that maybe some of these groups are already talking about it, but maybe not so much to the extent that everyone really should be. Like I would really love a huge push from AAMD or like some sort of like directors, like higher up level, because I feel like there's only so many things that we can do in our field. And like Paul, just like you said, like every single one of us in the RISD Museum, we are all taking on climate as part of our own jobs. And like we're all in our individual departments the expertise in our area. So like I rely on design to be the expertise in their area. So like I want them to be look.
Yep, I think she froze. But I'm taking notes on the push from directors and other network. We lost you
Am I
for,
back? I know.
yeah.
My internet, my internet doesn't go down when I'm at home, but when I come to the office, my internet goes down. But I'm just thinking, like everyone's professional network, if we were talking about it in a whole bunch of different professional networks, and if like the buy-in from the top, buy-in from the bottom, and then giving people time and energy to research the things in their own individual areas. I think that would be the most helpful for me in my job and for us in the field.
That's really nice to hear. I mean, I think that's part of this idea of this cultural associations agreeing to climate collaboration is to get the associations together to agree. And then when we have projects like, frankly, for the Department of Energy grant, when we went out to a bunch of the national associations to see if they would donate for in-kind and funding for reviewers for the grants, most stood up, right? AMD, AM, et cetera. And so I think there's more and more of these opportunities where if we can get the network of networks together, then you wouldn't just get that I'm going to say validation that yes, it's important. And yes, climate is in everyone's job, but that they're doing something about it too, right? So it's kind of this two-way street. So I definitely think that was our kind of realization of bottom up, top down, side to side, support. So then, yeah, you can be your expert and then you can have the support from all sides and not discounting the boards. I think Annie said, and other leadership. And so we are trying to sort that out. What does that look like? Is that resources, webinars we can help do? We're just trying to get more membership associations on and together in this group, like everything, kind of building the plane and flying it. Where does that go? And then how can we make sure then you as a member or staff member are getting the support you need? So that's really helpful to hear. And I think we can keep that in mind as we keep moving ahead.
And I love that you push, Marnie, that everybody has some sort of agency, whether it's right at their desk, whether it's through their specific network, or it's because they're a member of an association they call and they say, look, you need to make sure that this climate money comes to the cultural sector. All of those levels of advocacy of agency are important and available at different times to everybody else. But we don't always notice it until we see somebody else flex their muscles in a particular area. So by having this group together, I'm sure that boosts everybody's confidence in making changes at any scale when they get back home.
Colleen, love to see it. Well done on
Yes.
starting to recycle. We're here to celebrate all
Yep.
size victories. That's great to hear.
Because we're always saying that every single one of these steps is how you build the muscles and capacity for whatever the next thing is, which you can't even necessarily predict. We all went to museum school and we learned to think in a straight line, very strategically with our project planning. But this networked systems thinking stuff doesn't follow along that way. And we've found we've had to adapt. But that's what makes it so interesting.
I want to be respectful of time. So I'm just going to drop our contact information in the chat. Please reach out if you have any follow-up or questions. This is also our website where we have information about most of our existing work. But thank you again for having us, and we hope to hear from all of you soon, and we'll definitely be in touch with NEMA for any future opportunities and cooperative projects.
And thank you all for who've been part of these projects. It's made all the difference. We know we can call on NEMA and fill up the ranks.
We are always happy to partner with you. Henry, I think you can actually save the chat.
I was looking for how to do that.
Yeah, the three little dots at the very
Three
bottom
dots.
of the
Okay,
chat.
save chat. Okay, show in Finder.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. It's saved. I just wanted all those wonderful links.
Yep, there's some great links in there. I want to say thank you to Sarah and Stephanie and Paul and Matt, and I look forward to see everybody in November up in Portland, Maine for our annual conference.
Sure. And next month we gather again. What was, you said the date, Paul, and October 5th. October 5th, almost a month from today, 3 p.m. in the afternoon again. For those of you that have not religiously attended these gatherings, usually what we do is 1 month is a guest speaker, and then the other month is more like a work session. So our October meeting will be a work session. We're going to specifically dive into something that got brought up today, which is that kind of I wrote it down. The psychology and communication piece of the work. So generating climate conversations with visitors. We're going to talk about environmental literacy and discuss the idea of a set of benchmarks or standards for environmental literacy as generated by the NEMA community. So, and yours truly will be leading that conversation. So
that sounds good.
Well, please come, Sarah.
I was just thinking,
Yeah, feel free to join us. Yeah,
Yes,
you can come.
everybody can
We
join
might be
us.
there.
Please come.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I should just mention, that one of the core values of the New England Museum Association is to equip our members with the language and the tools to address the climate change situation, to equip people with language and tools for advocacy, to seek funding, and to make a difference in the visitors they serve. So I'm really interested in that language piece. So what does that mean to give our membership the language to intelligently and accurately converse? Museums are routinely acknowledged for being trusted sources of information. So what do we do with that? What do we do with that in a conversation about climate?
I just had a quick question. I would guess, but will there be an in-person convening during the NEMA meeting in November in Portland?
There's a couple environmental green sessions. We don't have anything planned for this particular COP right now, but meetups happen during conference, so we could definitely we could do something.
We could make it happen. We could do a meetup for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So thank you, Maureen, for that query. We will, Paul and I will and Heather will put our heads together on that one.
All right, it's 4 o'clock.
Thanks for
Thank
coming,
you, everyone.
everybody.
Till next
Thank you
week.
very much.
Or next month.
Hopefully we'll see
Bye.
you next month.
Thank you, everyone.